Welcome back to Rockstock Channel and another in our Getting to Know You series with Jindalee Lithium. Jindalee trades on the Australian Stock Exchange, ticker symbol JLL, and on the OTCQX, ticker symbol JNDAF. Current stock price is 24 Australian cents, and it has a market cap of 17 million Australian dollars or 13 million US. Jindalee is progressing the McDermitt Lithium project in Oregon, described as the largest lithium resource in the United States, with 21.5 million lithium carbon equivalent tons resource. The deposit mirrors the scale and style of Lithium America's Thacker Pass deposit across the border in northwestern Nevada. Jindalee has about 6.4 million Australian in cash on the balance sheet, having recently concluded equity and convertible note capital raises and an entitlement issue in July and August. Please note that after Rodney's interview with CEO Ian Rodger, which follows this introduction, Jindalee announced that its U.S. subsidiary HiTech Minerals executed a strategic cooperative research and development agreement with the U.S. Department of Energy. The agreement will test new extraction methods aimed at reducing costs, lowering water usage, reducing acid consumption, and minimizing the need for tailings impoundments. We have inserted at the end of this video a short discussion of this agreement with Jindalee's chairman, Lindsay Dudfield. You can follow Jindalee on X at JindaleeL and can find the company and our guest today, CEO Ian Rodger, on LinkedIn. Michael Bentley of Australian research and financial services platform MST Financial recently wrote a research note for Jindalee affixing a valuation of about $2 per share. If you'd like a copy of this note, you could find it at Jindalee's website, JindaleeLithium.com, or by emailing us at rockstockchannel@rkequity.com, or tag us on X at LithiumIonBull and at RodneyHooper13. To be clear, Rodney and I are not strategic advisors to nor invested in Jindalee. And of course, we are not financial advisors, and nothing in this video should be considered investment advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video. Note that a written summary of this interview will be published in the next edition of RK Equity's Lithium Ion Bull. Please register your email at rkequity.com if you'd like to receive this newsletter directly to your email box. And please make sure to like this video, subscribe to Rockstock Channel, and leave a question or comment below. What do you think of Jindalee's prospects? What other companies might you be interested to hear from on this channel? And with that intro out of the way, have a listen to Rodney's interview with Ian Rodger conducted earlier this week.
Thanks, Howard and Rodney, and pleasure to be here with you. To give you a bit of background, I guess I'll start with Jindalee and I guess then relate to how I became involved. Jindalee is a sort of unique from a junior mining company. We've been listed for 20 years and have actually created a lot of value for shareholders over that period of time. We didn't raise equity for 17 of those sort of 20 odd years because of the value we created through the project generation model. As a result, we have very very few shares on issue. The top 20 hold 70% of the stock, so we've got a tight and sort of loyal supporting shareholder base that's been there for a long period of time. And Jindalee's strategy has always been to find the company making asset. With continued success at McDermitt, the strategy was to sort of develop the team from more of an exploration focus into development, and Lindsay and the chairman at the time, Justin, got in touch in the tail end of last year. In terms of myself, my background, I've got a blend of sort of technical and commercial experience. I'm a mining engineer originally. I cut my teeth with Rio Tinto across two large greenfield mine developments from sort of operational readiness into full production before sort of cutting my teeth as an investment merchant banker in London predominantly, but Sydney also. And most recently I was with Oz Minerals as a project director looking at the technical and commercial work streams, looking to integrate a large WA nickel project into the battery value chain. And we ultimately got taken over in a circa $10 billion transaction with BHP. And at the end of that, I was pretty keen to sort of leverage the experience and find somewhere to create value. And it just coalesced with meeting the Jindalee team, and I came on board in January.
Okay, great. Yeah, as we said, it's good to have you on the channel. for the first time. Just to give the viewers, the listeners, a bit of background. I mean, the McDermitt project is the largest lithium project in the US. Can you give some sort of a sense around the data on size, grade, the location, and what you used as a cutoff grade to get that resource size?
Yeah, for sure, Rodney. I guess start with the location. We're on the border of Oregon and Nevada, but the deposit as it stands is wholly, sorry, the resource as it stands is wholly in Oregon. It's in the same caldera as Lithium Americas, same geological formation with Stack of Pass, I should say. And it's a huge sedimentary deposit, 21.5 million tons LCE, that sort of scale. It's bigger than sort of Green Bushes and Pilgangora for that, that sort of reference point in terms of scale. It's a sedimentary deposit. I mentioned the caldera. Essentially, it was a lake once upon a time, and layers sort of settled out, and 4 of those layers make up our deposit with elevated lithium grades. And you asked about cutoff grade. So because of the sedimentary mineralization, we don't measure it in lithium oxide. It's lithium ppm, and so our cutoff's about 1,000 ppm, and our resource grade is about 1340 ppm. But there is a number of different units, I should say, within that deposit that carry higher grade. And one of the value optimizations that we're incorporating into the PFS later this year is really trying to target that higher grade material. And these lenses are these deposits are sort of like the copper porphyries of the lithium world. They're sort of large, lower grade, but really generational assets, and they're unique in that. Or ours is in particular just very high strip, very soft material. Like a spodumene type deposit might have a strip ratio of 4 to 7 to 1. This is around 1 or less. Might be slightly higher, but if you run a high grade strategy, but you get the mining costs are very sort of immaterial to the whole operation. So it allows you to sort of target that sort of high grade segments. So we look forward to sort of putting out the PFS and demonstrating what that could potentially look like.
Okay, great. And like other projects in the area, LAC and so on, you've applied for 2 separate grants. How are those applications progressing?
Yeah, we put out an announcement earlier in the year around those. But I think it's important to highlight there, like you said, grant applications. They're not loans. Lithium America has been successful with loans and the grants, and really the grants have focused that pre-production funding to really help accelerate different aspects. So one with the Department of Defense, which perhaps we're more excited about, could potentially co-fund a feasibility study and associated test work and drill program, and materially co-fund us through towards a final investment decision. The Department of Energy one is for a much larger amount, but more longer dated, looking at building a demonstration facility or other processing facility at McDermitt. In terms of the current status, we've been through a number of steps. Our applications have sort of went in supported by potential project partners and local politicians and the like. We've been through a couple of stages of review. We're informed that we should expect a notification decision on both of those sometime before the end of the year, one way or the other. They're sort of mutually exclusive as well, so we could be successful with none or both or one. So yeah, we are excited to see how that plays out.
Right, and you recently raised cash. I see management, especially Lindsay, has a meaningful stake in the company. Did the management participate in that raise?
Yeah, we raised about $6 million through a structured equity placement, rights issue, and convertible note, and very, very well supported by Lindsay. So Lindsay Dugfield, he's an executive director, but our biggest shareholder, and he obviously heavily contributed to that equity raise, and the rest of the board obviously invested as well alongside myself. So we're all sort of, believers that's tremendous value at this point, given given the disconnect with the market at the moment. So, and we had a very strong support from our shareholder base as well. Our rights issue, had an uptake of circa 83%. So, given the market conditions, we were very pleased with the outcome.
That's great. And you have access to further funding from Mercer Street. Can you elaborate on the quantity and terms of that agreement?
Yep. As part of that $6 million raise I mentioned, we executed agreement with Mercer Street to invest $3.5 million across a equity placement and convertible notes, 0.5 of equity, 3 in a convertible note. And they've got another $9 million earmarked for to invest in Jindalee as we sort of progress through these milestones. The terms, that funding and the terms of subject to mutual agreement, but they're in line with the terms we initially had in terms of a convertible structure. Initially, the first $3 million note has a conversion price at a premium for a period of time before flipping to a discount to our prevailing share price, subject to a floor. So, given the market conditions, that sort of convertible structure was really seen as a non-dilutive way to sort of support, us through a couple of key project milestones.
And Ian, now that you have the funding, you've got it earmarked for various purposes and milestones. Can you provide the details on those?
Yeah, absolutely. So front and center is really delivering the PFS to date. We've had a number of big drill programs and built the resource out, but we haven't really had a study in the public domain to really educate the market in terms of the potential of the asset. So I mentioned some value optimizations earlier, but when we had appointed Fluor, who are our lead engineer, in the middle of last year to lead the PFS, we'd sort of designed a compressed scope to leverage the work that Lithium Americas and others had done, and Fluor obviously got a lot of experience in the space, having worked for Ioneer. And then when we got through the study, we realized there was a couple of material value optimizations. The biggest being this high grade strategy, ability to sort of target higher grade units over multi decades and lift that the run of mine grade to that sort of circa 2000 BPM level, and really improve the metrics. So really the funding will go to completing that and just refining the PFS. It'll also allow us to round out the government funding, but also really focus in on a lot of the work we're doing on the ground with from an ESG point of view, working with local tribes, continuing our permitting. We're set to go through a sort of major stage gate next year. So just keeps all those really critical project activities underway.
Talking of that, Ian, your ESG and community engagement is always important. Where is Jindalee in that process?
We've spent a lot of time and effort in around sort of building relationships locally from a community point of view, and we're building out the team at the moment. You would have noticed that we've just recently we've announced an agreement with the Department of Energy, consortium led with a bunch of research organizations focused at, a lot of that sort of funding and research is going into, ways to improve the sustainability of the project. So we're really spending a lot of time in this area because we know that for a project to be successful, it needs to really, create value for the widest range of shareholders. And we're trying to incorporate a lot of those local stakeholders as part of the journey.
And you've made great progress on your flow sheet and produced battery-grade carbonate. Is it fair to say that your PFS work in that department is complete, or is there any outstanding issues there?
No. So in essence, the PFS test work program is done. I'll probably zoom out for a second. I mentioned Fluor before, but we'd appointed them middle of last year to run the test work program alongside the PFS study as well. And really a deliberate choice given that their level of experience in the space. And so really, we set out on a bench scale test work program to test all the units of operations in the flow sheet. We had there's two key real steps, obviously the beneficiation and then the acid leaching, and then producing a battery grade lithium carbonate through a bunch of purification steps. And late last year we had the beneficiation results out. Earlier this year we had the acid leaching results out, and then as you point out, we produced battery grade lithium carbonate at the end of July, and we've really been impressed with the results. Sort of recoveries are sort of surprised to the upside. So we're in a good place on that, and look forward to embedding that into the PFS.
And Ian, the timing on the PFS, what's your latest sort of expectation on that?
Yeah, that'll be Q4.
So before the end of the year?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, great. And you signed an MOU with POSCO. What's the status there? What's the thinking there?
Yep. So we signed an MOU with POSCO last year. We sent them some beneficiated sample earlier this year, and they've done a bunch of work in Korea this year on that sample, and shared provisional results. We're sort of working closely with POSCO. It's really a collaboration agreement. They're keen to see the results of the PFS. There's no sort of other rights in the agreement in terms of offtake or first rights on anything. So really, once we get the PFS done, we'll sit down with POSCO and discuss next steps. And similarly, when they've finished their program, we'll sit down and discuss that. But they've obviously got world-class capabilities and a potential future partner.
Yeah, we hear positive things on their conversion plant, so they seem to be digging deeper and making some progress in lithium.
Yep.
In your mind, does the lack permitting approval help Jindalee? And where are you? When are you hoping to achieve that milestone? What's the timeline for that?
Clearly, Thacker Pass now fully permitted. Wasn't necessarily a straight line process for them, and I guess we're in some ways trying to be fast followers. So we hope to sort of build on those learnings and achieve a sort of smoother outcome. Too early to say when we'd expect to submit and receive all required approvals, because it's sort of dependent on study progression, etc. But as part of the PFS, we've completed a sort of PFS strategy that we look forward to sort of outlining in due course, but outlines the key decision points along the journey and decisions. What I can say is that we're located wholly on federal land, which is administrated by the BLM, so very very similar to or identical in that sense to say Thacker Pass with the Americas and Ioneer at Rollout Ridge, and the BLM permitting gates are what really drives the timeline for the permitting. And there's sort of three key stages. One is a notice, which we've operated under to date. Then there's an exploration plan of operations, and I mentioned earlier that we're in that process at the moment, the NEPA process, and we hope to sort of have that complete sometime in the new year, which will allow us to do a much larger a drill program, given the notice is kind of restricted to that 5 acres. And then the key point, which is hard to answer, is when we submit our mine plan of operations, which is in a couple of years' time, and that really drives the timeframe to ultimate approval.
Great. And when you think about funding the project, how does Jindalee sort of envisage what would be an ideal outcome for the company?
Yep. Yeah, really good question. I think it's important to, from our side, I think, context is everything. McDermitt, large, long life, strategically located asset, but it's going to be, capital intense, but operate, we know from what we've seen from the PFS to date, we're well over half a century, and that's not even really scraping the surface. But in the case of lithium, you've got, a very exciting but relatively immature market that's growing at double-digit CAGR. You've seen price volatility and investment whipsaw. So really, if you combine those two things, it's really, our approach is underpinned by a partnership approach, similar to, big projects in the copper porphyry space or the iron ore space. It's really about sort of partnering and sharing that risk. And so, and the other element given in the US is the government support, which we touched on earlier. So I won't sort of delve into too much about that. But in terms of partnerships, I mentioned we'll be working with POSCO. There's been, a range of other groups that have expressed a bit of interest, but the key really to unlock that is a PFS, because we just haven't had the data in the market to educate people on the potential of this asset. And our view is, we want to get a group, a partner or partners involved, after the PFS is out, before we sort of lock horns on a definitive feasibility study or the like. Given that it's going to be a large project connected into the chemical market, there's the opportunity to sort of get partners involved that provide that connection and technical and commercial expertise. So in terms of what would plan A for us look like, one would hopefully successful on some of the grants to sort of co-fund the next stage of study, and then from a Jindalee shareholder point of view, then the other lick of that funding is funded through some sort of partnership, whether it be a joint venture earn-in or some other structure that then really preserves the the capital structure for Jindalee and limits dilution, and ends up with a project that's got a real potential to come to life.
Okay, excellent. Well, you guys have done a great job in minimizing dilution to date, and come a long way with a big resource with a limited amount of having to issue. So that's good, and we look forward to chatting to you again once that initial feasibility study is out, and get a sense of where we are. The market looks to potentially have bottomed, and now we'll see where we go to from here. We continue to get feedback that a number of parties out of South Korea and China are still looking for feedstock, so they obviously are concerned about the long term or have a deeper understanding of the need for it. And you're well located in the North American market to assist in the objective of an ex-China supply chain, I guess, secure supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, it's through our engagements we've found, while the lithium price coming off, there's been subdued investment appetite from typical institutional investors, etc. Certainly the groups in Japan and South Korea, to differing degrees, are taking a longer term view, cautiously, given that where the price levels are now, the value equation looks a lot more in their favor, whether they're looking at any project really. So yeah, I
think that's an important point, because I think China has gone out and secured assets to the extent that they have pretty low-grade lepidolite deposits and sort of variable spodumene deposits. The brines seem to be okay. They're sort of building, whereas Japan and South Korea have been, critical mineral challenged and are reliant. So I guess they are far more open to partnerships, and their objective is, it seems to be, to tap into the IRA or into, a different sort of market set. So it's well aligned, for guys like yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we touched on the government support. One of the elements we announced just this week was a strategic research and development agreement with the Department of Energy through their AIMS laboratory, which I think is a really important milestone for us, and potentially just shows the from the US side, the level of engagement and willingness to for these supply chains to really be built out. So we look forward to sort of working on that, which could really, that work won't feed into our PFS, but it'll be part of the next stage of work over 2 years on a bunch of opportunities to really improve the outcomes for our process.
Okay, great. Ian, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Jindalee Lithium Executive Director Lindsay Dudfield joins me now to talk us through the Strategic Cooperative Research and Development Agreement between its US subsidiary, HiTech Minerals, and Amos National Laboratory, which has been approved by the US Department of Energy. Lindsay, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, pleasure to be on there, Tyler.
So, talk to us about this agreement and what it means for the company.
Well, look, it's a pretty significant agreement. We're very excited about it. So, as you said, it's a cooperative research and development agreement, or CRADA is the acronym that we'll use and that everyone wants to use. And it's signed with AIMS, which is with the National Laboratory, which is a part of the US Department of Energy, and the agency which leads the Department of Energy's Critical Minerals Innovation Hub. Also, for those that aren't aware, AIMS was also, if you go back in history, important part of the development of the Manhattan Project, but that's a story for another time. But they're a very highly regarded agency. So there's other members of the CRADA, which are also important to highlight, which includes DGAMI, which is the Oregon Mines Department, also happens to be the lead permitting agency in Oregon. And I should point out that our McDermitt deposit, which is the largest lithium deposit in the United States, straddles the Oregon-Nevada border. So that's their inclusion is very significant. What are they going to do? What's the CRADA going to do? It's going to investigate innovative ways to extract lithium and potentially other valuable metals from McDermitt. And we'll also look at ways to lower extraction costs, reduce our environmental impact of the project. So that's things like reducing water usage, limiting the size of our tailings and waste dumps, and reducing acid consumption. So very useful data which will feed into our flow sheet.